Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for has arrived. Principal Copeland's voice boomed through the microphone. It's time for the competition of king and queen of the homecoming dance. The crowd erupted into excited whispers as he continued. We have Marissa Rickenbacker and Dean Hassad, and on the other side we have Keith and Nettie Cameron. Keith nervously scanned the faces in the crowd, feeling his heart race faster with each passing second. He glanced at Nettie, who waved and patted her brother Jack on the back, offering a reassuring smile. Dean and Marissa will be performing a rehearsed dance, Principal Copeland announced, while Keith and Nettie will be showcasing their duet performance on the microphone. It's up to you to decide who entertained us best. The crowd cheered in anticipation as he added, "First up, Dean and Marissa, followed by Nettie and Keith. Let's begin." As they watched Dean and Marissa take their positions on the dance floor, Keith suddenly felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Angelica and Chris standing behind him, causing him to tense up. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "We want you to drop out," Angelica stated boldly. "We're going to tell everyone about your incestuous sexual relationship with Nettie after this performance. You'll never recover from that." Before anyone could respond, Jack laughed dismissively. "Nobody will believe it." Jack chuckled and said, "I recorded you guys talking about being all over each other after that joke you played on them the other day. Unless you want that shit showing up at your parents' doorstep or in their email, I suggest you lay off of them." Chris chimed in, but Candace stepped forward confidently. "Remember how you told them you were going to do it in the dark with glow-in-the-dark condoms?" she said, causing Angelica to take a step back and her expression to shift from daring and bratty to fearful and panicked. "You bitch," Angelica yelled. "Bye-bye. See ya." Jack waved mockingly at her as Chris pulled her away, clearly shaken. Nettie couldn't help but smile at their victory as she turned back to watch Dean and Marissa perform their acrobatic dance to the song Old Town Road. They were doing well, and she knew it would be tough competition for their own performance. She glanced at Keith and saw him intently observing the performance, obviously impressed. "Shit, they're not bad," he murmured. "You're better," Nettie replied confidently. "Do it like you do it at the club." "Yeah, man, you got this." Jack pumped his fist in support while Candace added, "Give it to them." Keith took a deep breath and felt a surge of confidence coursing through him as he prepared for their own performance. With Nettie by his side and their friends cheering them on, he knew they could give Dean and Marissa run for their money. As Angelica and Chris stepped away from the rest of their friends who continued to dance, she felt a surge of rage towards them. They had been caught spying on her, and now they were trying to blackmail her into changing her ways. But Angelica didn't care. She was a user and she made no apologies for it. She always got what she wanted, and this time would be no different. "The girls he's hanging with have more balls than he does," Chris muttered as they walked. "If your parents find out about us, they'll tell my parents and Dean's parents. We have to lay off." Angelica shot him a sharp look with her deep, dark eyes. "Shut up, Chris, or I'll stop sleeping with you," she snapped. "You act like such a baby sometimes. Come on." She grabbed his hand forcefully. "What are you doing?" Chris asked, confused. "The reason those nerds got dropped off in a limo instead of Keith and Nettie's car is because their mom is at work making sex toys and animatronic dicks for lonely women who can't get boyfriends because they're too fat and ugly," Angelica said as she picked up her pace. "What about it?" Chris questioned. Rolling her eyes, Angelica turned to face him and pressed her lips against his in a deep kiss in the school parking lot. "You may not be smart when it comes to street smarts, but you screw so damn good," she whispered in between kisses. "Promise me, babe, that you'll get a good tech job after all of this is over. You and Dean—" "Yeah, babe," Chris agreed eagerly. "We'll take care of you." Angelica smiled up at him before continuing her plan. "While they're all at the party, we'll break into Keith's house and steal a bunch of valuable things belonging to his mom. We'll use them as leverage to get those stupid recordings they have of us, and then I want you to make copies of everything. Anyone who works for a sex toy company is bound to have some juicy secrets we can use against them. So we'll break in, grab the goods, and get out." "What about Dean and Marissa?" Chris asked. "Forget them," Angelica replied coldly. "We'll tell Dean what he needs to know once we're done. Then we're going to the lake and I'm going to rock your world. How does that sound?" She reached down between his legs and squeezed, reveling in her power over him. Despite Chris's high GPA, he was easily manipulated by Angelica's false promises. By the time college rolled around, she would dump both him and Dean and find new targets to control with her charm and sexuality. She loved herself unapologetically, just as much as she loved using men for her own pleasure. As the music began to play, Jack found himself begrudgingly impressed by the dancers in front of him. He clapped along with the crowd, trying to ignore the fact that he didn't particularly care for either of the two participants. Leaning over to his friends Keith and Nettie, he yelled above the cheers as the dance ended. "Hey, why is it always the jerks who have to be good at something other than being awful?" Jack exclaimed. Nettie rolled her eyes at Jack's remark, while Keith couldn't help but chuckle at his friend's blunt thoughts. The principal continued to clap enthusiastically before turning on his microphone. "I'm going to need 2 more microphones for our next contestants," he announced, shaking the mic in front of him. "Let's welcome our classmates Nettie and Keith Cameron." Keith shared a sly wink with Nettie as they took their mics, ready to show off their skills as a dancing duo. The principal looked slightly confused, as he had been told it was supposed to be a karaoke competition, but he shrugged it off as the pair began to move in perfect sync to the beat of the music. The crowd joined in, clapping and swaying along as the familiar tune of "Stripped" by Depeche Mode, covered by Shiny Toy Guns, filled the air. "Take my hand, let's get away just for one day." Nettie's voice rang out clear and strong, causing glass around them to vibrate with its surprisingly haunting quality. Keith couldn't help but be momentarily stunned by her talent before joining in with his own microphone, matching her flawless vocals. It was a song he had only heard once before, never imagining he would have the chance to sing it in a duet. "Let me see you stripped down to the bone." Keith belted out the lyrics confidently as Nettie seamlessly picked up the next line. "Let me see you speaking just for me." The two of them danced and sang together, their voices blending in perfect harmony as they put on a show that left the audience in awe. Jack and Candace found themselves holding each other in shock as their friends seemed to be doing many things at once. Dancing, speaking from the heart, performing for everyone. The atmosphere was electric, the air filled with an unspoken energy that seemed to radiate from Keith and Nettie on stage. They moved with a fluid grace, their voices intertwining and harmonizing as they sang to each other. As the lyrics poured out of them, Jack couldn't help but feel like there was a hidden meaning behind them, something that only he and Nettie could understand. Keith's voice shook with emotion as he sang about wanting to see Nettie make decisions without the influence of television, while she responded with a plea for him to show his vulnerability and cry just for her. The intensity of their performance was so captivating that even the crowd seemed to pause and focus solely on them. Jack jumped as he heard the sound of a drink being dropped behind him, but his attention was immediately drawn back to Keith and Nettie circling each other on stage, hands intertwined. They were completely in sync, unapologetic in their care for each other and their ability to convey it through music. Keith's heart raced with excitement as he looked into Nettie's eyes under the swirling lights. He knew this song meant something special to her, something that went beyond just matching their earlier conversation. It was a symbol of their strong bond, one that had been built through conscious decisions to trust and love each other. As the lights of the DJ's booth focused solely on them, Keith and Nettie fell to their knees together in perfect synchrony at the last beat of the song. The crowd erupted into a chorus of cheers and applause as they gazed intently at each other, smiles lighting up their faces with excitement and amazement at what they had just accomplished. As the gymnasium lights returned to their normal brightness, there was a moment of complete silence before it was replaced by a deafening roar of voices, claps, and cheers. Keith and Nettie turned to see their best friends Jack and Candace, jaws seemingly unhinged as they enthusiastically applauded for them. Even the stern-faced principal couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief while joining in on the applause. He made his way towards Keith and Nettie, taking the microphone from Nettie with a smile. "Regardless of who wins King and Queen of Prom Night," he announced over the continuing cheers, "I'd like to make my prediction that these siblings are going to be all over the internet again, twice in a month for their continual surprises." He paused for effect before adding, "What voices? Incredible. And where did you two learn to dance?" Keith shrugged his shoulders with a grin on his face. It felt like Nettie must have been leading somehow, but in reality, it was as if he could anticipate her every move and effortlessly move with her. They hadn't practiced for this performance, but it seemed like they were meant to perform together all along. Nettie's gentle hand pressed firmly against Keith's back, bringing him back to reality as he gasped for air. His eyes were filled with tears as he looked down at her, and even amidst the cheers from the crowd, their embrace felt like the only thing that mattered. She smiled up at him, her hydrogel skin glimmering in the bright lights of the stage. It was clear that Keith was the one showing the most emotion as they stepped down, his hand still lingering on Nettie's back. As they waited anxiously for the results, a large projector displayed the votes on the overhead wall behind them. They laughed and gasped along with the audience as the numbers continued to climb in their favor. A big blue bar finally surpassed the names of their competitors, Dean and Marissa, and Keith and Nettie's names went up in bright lights. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, declaring Keith and Nettie as the winners for King and Queen of Homecoming. They stepped back onto the stage, beaming with pride as their principal crowned them both with spray-painted plastic crowns that resembled those of true royalty. Nettie couldn't contain her giggles as she glanced over at her brother, who flashed 2 hang-loose signs with his thumbs and pinkies. Their moment was pure joy and victory, a memory that would stay with them forever. "All right, everyone, enough of the boring stuff," Jack exclaimed with a mischievous grin. His friends Keith and Nettie joined in a group hug before they all headed out together. Hailing an Uber XL car, they piled in and set off on their journey from Pasadena to the Santa Monica Pier. The driver turned around to address them. "Any of you guys 18? Jack confidently handed over his fake ID without hesitation, while Candace looked shocked at his boldness. Keith didn't seem surprised, but he couldn't hide his excitement as he gushed about their hidden talents. "Wow, you guys can sing and dance? That's amazing." As they settled into their seats, Keith and Nettie sat in the back row while Jack and Candace took the middle seats. "Dude," Jack turned to his friend. Dude, you guys didn't tell me you could sing like that." "Yeah, or dance," Candace chuckled in agreement. "We had no idea we could do that," Keith exclaimed with amazement. "I mean, I always knew I could sing, but I had never heard Nettie sing before. She's incredible." The driver chimed in playfully. "Well, since we have a long half-hour drive ahead of us, why not entertain me with a song? What do you guys want to hear?" With smiles on their faces and newfound confidence in their abilities, the 4 friends eagerly discussed which song to perform for their captive audience. With a determined effort, Angelica and Chris managed to lift the heavy sliding door high enough to free the latch from the lock. Chris followed her into the darkened dining room, carefully navigating his way through the shadows. Angelica flicked on the light switch, but it didn't work. Undeterred, she tried another switch with the same result. Frustrated, she called out for help. "Alexa, all lights on," she commanded. A moment later, the dazzling glow of various lamps and chandeliers filled the house. Chris couldn't help but smile at his own cleverness as Angelica rolled her eyes in response, not wanting to give him any credit for his idea. "Let's find Cassie's room and her computer," Angelica declared authoritatively, leading them away from the kitchen and dining area towards what appeared to be the master bedroom. As they entered the spacious room, Angelica scanned her surroundings and noticed that there was no computer in sight. She quickly deduced that Cassie must have taken her laptop with her to work. This was not part of Angelica's plan, and she couldn't hide her disappointment. But just then, Chris called out for her to come back to the garage where he had found something of interest. Angelica shuffled back through the living room and dining area until she reached the garage entrance. As she stepped inside, she was greeted by an impressive display of rows upon rows of computer systems lining the walls and center of the room, each containing multiple portable hard drives. Chris turned on one of the monitors only to discover that the system was password protected. Angelica immediately ordered him to hack in, but Chris hesitated. "I can't just hack in," he explained. "These systems have tamper monitors. If we try to access them without proper authorization, Cassie's mother will be alerted." Frustrated but still determined, Angelica asked what they could do instead. Chris pointed to the hard drive slots on one of the computers. "Even if it's encrypted, this is a RAID system," he explained. "That means the data must be incredibly important if it requires multiple layers of protection. We can take one of the stacks and I might be able to decrypt it later, but I can't copy it here." "Why not?" Angelica demanded with a furrowed brow. "I don't have the necessary equipment for transferring this amount of data, and even if I did, it would take too long. The only way to access the information is by taking an entire row of drives, which weigh about 60 pounds each," Chris elaborated. "And if we start removing drives, someone will definitely notice before we finish." Angelica let out a sigh and crossed her arms in frustration. We need another plan, she stated firmly. Angelica emerged from the garage, her long dark hair swaying as she walked. Chris trailed closely behind her, his gaze fixed on her like a puppy following its master. She stopped and looked back at him, her piercing eyes meeting his. Chris knew that look all too well. It was a warning to keep quiet and do as he was told. He quickly closed the door to the garage behind him. Angelica shook her head in frustration, rolling her eyes before turning to search the house for something to use as leverage against Candace and retrieve her blackmail package. She entered Keith's room and began rummaging through his things, her perfectly manicured nails leaving small dents in various objects. She found the charging station for Keith's AR glasses on his cluttered desk, but they were nowhere to be seen. Of course the nerd would take his precious glasses to homecoming, she thought with disdain. The only reason she had initially dated him was because of his fit body, but when she realized she couldn't have sex with him due to his strict religious beliefs, she turned her attention to his friends who were more than willing and able to please her. Her mind drifted to college, where she could finally find a real man, or men, to satisfy her needs. But for now, Chris would have to do. "Come on," Angelica exclaimed impatiently. "You're a nerd too. What does he value enough to want back?" Chris let out a sigh and opened the glass case of his gaming computer. He carefully removed a small chip from the motherboard and held it up in front of Angelica's face. "This is a 5 terabyte solid-state drive containing all of Keith's data. It's encrypted, so he'll definitely want it back," Chris explained. "Can you make a copy of it?" Angelica asked eagerly. Chris shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. "It's unlikely. The encryption requires a specific key to unlock, and most programs would detect if the data was transferred before being unlocked. It's a security measure put in place by the operating system." "But can you do it with enough time?" Angelica pressed. "If I have enough time, I might be able to decrypt it off the original drive," Chris replied. "But it would take days, maybe even weeks." "How long exactly?" Angelica asked impatiently. Chris chuckled and shook his head. If he used a 12-character password, it would take approximately 63,000 years. So unless you plan on stalling Keith for that long, we'll need another plan. Angelica's voice hung in the air, her frustration coming to a head as she asked, "Can you copy it?" Chris let out a deep sigh and ran a hand through his hair before responding. "Yeah, with a sector-by-sector cloning program, but what's the point?" he emphasized, his tone laced with annoyance. Angelica shook her head and let out an exasperated breath. She knew that their chances of retrieving the audio file were slim at this point. "That audio file is on that hard drive at least," she trailed off, voicing her doubts. "Yeah, but it's also probably on the cloud, Jack's computer, Candace's computer. She had the original recording anyway, so who knows where that is," Chris said bitterly. "There's no getting the recording back. Leverage is our only option." As Angelica looked around the bedroom, she couldn't help but feel defeated. She turned and sat on the edge of Keith's desk, taking in her surroundings. "Would Keith even know that you couldn't decrypt the damn drive?" Angelica asked, trying to come up with a plan. Chris didn't respond, instead just eyeing the SSD drive in his hands and shaking his head. Angelica gave him a knowing nod, understanding the weight of their predicament. "Fine," she said after a moment's silence. "Take the drive, make them promise not to send the audio recording anywhere or show our parents, and then delete it all. Or we can just decrypt their drive and be done with this shit." With purposeful steps, Angelica walked away from Keith's desk and intentionally knocked over his tower. The cables yanked at each other as they disconnected from their ports, and everything came crashing down in a cacophony of noise. Chris followed Angelica out of the room, and they left through the back sliding glass door, the same way they had entered. Little did they know, as they made their escape, that a sudden spark had ignited inside the computer case, causing it to short out and catch fire. Thick smoke began to pour from the interior as the electricity flickered and then went out completely. In the garage, battery backups kicked on just as an orange glow illuminated from under the door. The reflection of the flames danced wildly across the cold concrete floor, casting eerie shadows in every direction. As they cruised along in the Uber XL towards San Diego, the group was singing and laughing. But Keith was the first to notice when Nettie's expression shifted from joy to something else entirely. Her smile disappeared, and her eyes widened with fear as she looked down at the back of the driver's seat, as if searching for some answer or escape. She gripped at her dress, her fingers digging into the fabric as she turned to Keith with desperation in her eyes. What is it? Jack asked, noticing the sudden change in atmosphere. Nettie? Candace chimed in, her voice filled with concern. Nettie reached out and grabbed onto Keith's arm, her grip tight and desperate. Something's wrong at home, she said, her words rushed and panicked. What is it? Keith asked, his own anxiety rising. The server. It went into backup mode, and we only have 15 minutes, Nettie explained frantically. Keith's hands began to tremble as he fumbled through his pockets for his phone. The urgency in his movements caused him to struggle to find it on the first try. A server? What's going on? Jack questioned, now fully invested in the situation. I have to call my mom. Driver, we need to turn around, Keith exclaimed, struggling to control his shaking voice. Nettie? Keith held his phone out to her. I can't, Nettie replied, holding up her fingers. She needed a stylus to navigate the touchscreen of her phone. She handed the device to Jack. My passcode is 1357. Please call my mom, Keith instructed, his breathing becoming more rapid with each passing second. I can't handle this. His gasps turned into curses as he tried to calm himself down, but the panic had taken hold and was not letting go. Nettie gently reached out and placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tense muscles beneath them. She spoke in a soothing voice, reminiscent of their previous encounter. Deep breaths, in through your nose and out through your mouth, she reminded him, mimicking the calming techniques they had used before. Jack handed Keith his cell phone back, his face etched with concern. Candace's eyes were wide with worry as well. What is it? She asked, leaning in closer. Keith struggled to speak, his voice strained. The server. Mom, the server. You need to go home to the server. Nettie took the phone from him and ran her other hand through his hair, trying to offer comfort in any way she could. It's Nettie, Mom, she said into the phone. The server is in backup mode. We have 12 minutes left, and there's a significant rise in temperature on the motherboard. It's too high for just the fans to be causing it. I think we should call the fire department. There was a moment of silence before Cassie responded. Where are you? In an Uber. We're heading back home, but it'll take about 20 minutes, Nettie replied. Okay, Cassie said quickly, her mind already working on a plan. Stay put. Trust Keith to handle whatever happens next. I'm calling the fire department now. I love you. I love you too, Mom, Nettie said sincerely before the line went dead. She turned to look at Keith, who was staring at her with both fear and determination in his eyes. Jack and Candace looked on with worried expressions. The fire department is on their way, and Mom is heading home, Nettie informed them calmly. She told me to trust you and do whatever needs to be done when the time comes. I know this is scary, but I have faith in you. Raid drives are redundant for a reason, Keith. I love you. I love you too, Nettie, Keith said, pulling her close to him in a tight embrace.